Our veterans have a tough job. They had a tough job. Our soldiers have a tough job. And often it comes with things unforeseen, quite a few things. And yet they offer their lives for us, honestly, and often for the world. They believe from their point of view, from wherever their vantage point, whether they're maybe even a Russian soldier to an American one, to a Canadian one, or one in any country, often it's to uplift humanity. They believe their cause is just. What they know of it, they believe is just, because that's often the line given to each of us. Our country is just. And we live in interesting times because I feel like, especially here in the West, but maybe all over the world, and I believe all over the world, there's been more of an awakening to the company line, that it is a company line. It's not exactly for humanity, it's for someone's pocketbooks, it's for someone's power, it's for some other ulterior motive, not to uplift everyone. And yet throughout history, our soldiers have been there with that true intent, that loving intent, and they've often lost their lives in service to that love of us, love of their neighbor. It's not an easy thing to reflect on today because we're faced with some pretty notable conflicts, especially for us here in the West. You know, any conflict's notable when you're in it. But the Ukraine-Russian conflict, and Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Hamas, however you want to think of it. Honestly, they're complicated things, but I've been reflecting a little bit about this, and I listened to some soldiers on the Israeli side and how they started to realize in their work after they had left being an infantry person or during, that some of what they were doing wasn't the best. They realized that how they were treating the Palestinians wasn't exactly what they signed up for. It wasn't what they thought they were going to do. And yet many other soldiers believe what they're doing was for safeguarding their nation. Now we can get into the politics, but we probably won't. But I think often our soldiers hold this duality, realizing that some of what they have done, maybe a lot of what they have done, isn't for the best. They have a hard time grokking, why did I go to Vietnam? Why was I part of the bombing of all these villages, all these things? I thought I was going to safeguard democracy and freedom. And yet, you know what, I realized over there that it's not always seemingly the case. And yes, I killed civilians, I did this and that. How could it be for ultimate freedom? I think these are questions we have to hold today because whether we like it or not, they're on our back steps, they're on our stoops. These questions, these tough dilemmas involve all of us today because we each have a voice and it's important. And so we can't pass over the other side of the casualty list, which is, of course, the civilians. Now, I'm thinking about Christ, and I'm wondering, does he fall on one side or the other? Here he is. Clearly what the Salvation Army, my home church when I was a kid, used to call a soldier of the Lord, right? How could he not be? He's probably commander-in-chief to the Salvation Army. I don't remember them saying that, but it would make sense. Jesus is commander-in-chief. And here he is, he's a martyr. I mean, we know it. We're not there yet in the story, but we all know, not the end of the story, but a big milestone in the story. That is his death. That is his murder. And yet here he is saying he's come to be murdered. He's here to be killed. And I find this interesting because I think we can take it too far in multiple directions, but it's for each of us to decide. You could think of it this way. Each of our deaths has an appointed hour. It's true. At least the Lord knows it. He may not have put it in a book and stamped it and said, well, no matter what happens, they have to die in this hour. But things play out how they play out. Even in our freedom, we're told the Lord's wisdom knows all things, It's not that the Lord controls each of us, although, maybe there's some truth to that in some way. Because it is the Lord shining through us, it's the Lord shining through the details. But we have a sense of freedom. We have a sense of mastery, and the earth does too. Asteroid can come crashing down. Tidal wave can hit us. Car can clip us in the wrong way. It's true. And yet the Lord knows that. We were meant for that if it happens to us. Whatever happens to us, in a sense, you could say was ordained. And I know this is a tricky subject for people, but I can't help but take some solace in the idea that even in the hard things, the Lord is working, teaching us what we don't like, what we do. But maybe more so, how to rise above that constant shifting in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, to see the garden around us, even though the tree's still there. We're not eating from it as much. But that tree of good and evil, the knowledge of it, the death still occurs. All these things still occur, but maybe the Lord is sussing out of us, even through the tough times, often thanks to the tough times, a peace. A letting go. And that's kind of the heart of what I wanted to talk about today. So letting go. Because often that's our problem. When we go through something traumatic, we hold on to it in one way or another. We fight it off, so we don't deal with it. That thing that happened to us when we were, maybe before we even remember it, 3, 4, 7, 12, 25. Things happen to us and we don't want to have them expose the feelings that came up through that. We don't want the feelings that came with those moments to really have their freedom of expression. And so we fight them off. We push them down, and they end up coming out the next day or years later. Maybe they keep trying to come out through our, anger at something random. We don't even know why we're so angry. Why? I can't help it. It's me. I'm angry at that. Often our traumatic moments, or even just our painful ones, even just a little thing when we were a kid from a teacher, could kind of pain us against a certain demographic for a while. We may find that we either bow in quiescence towards someone because they remind us of that third grade teacher who knows, was mean to us. Or we're drawn to it all the time and we think that it feeds us, we think it brings us peace because we had a little sense of joy in that moment. We did that one thing, one time. Now we keep returning to it, to escape. That's how addictions form, whether it's sexual, whether it's drugs, whether it's entertainment, whether it's judgments against ourselves or other people. These things we think feed us, and they often have to do with the fact that we don't let go. We don't let go. I was listening to this wise person named Michael Singer. At least I find him wise. And I hadn't really listened to him much. And he put it this way. He said, when something comes up for each of us, our task is very easy. It's very light, like Christ's burden. We should relax and let it pass on. Let it go. Relax and let it rise. Let it have its time. That anger, maybe it's always coming up and you're fighting it, but it finds a life. Maybe you identify with it. But instead, letting it arise and relaxing around it, not forcing it to relax, but relaxing around it, noticing that you are like the sanctuary and that anger is like, someone yelling in the middle of it for a moment. You can receive it, let it have its moments, not directed at anyone specific. And then you can let it go. You can let go of your attachment, your identification with it. Christ is expressing this, I think, in multiple ways. He's showing that he's relaxed around his own death. He's found some relaxation around it. He's having dinner. He's doing these things. He mentions it in the middle of dinner. He's like, you're not going to have me for very long. Let her put oil, on my head or whatever. He's relaxed around it, maybe not always in a dismissive way, but you can see that he's accepted it. And it plays a part in his life, but not obsessively so, where he's hemming and hawing about how the Pharisees and the Romans are such bad people, and they're going to do this, and I can't believe I saw myself being whipped, and this, and this, and this. No, he accepts it. It's part of his life. He's not hiding from it. And he's also helping his followers accept it. He's bringing it up. He's leaving. He's leaving. Often, this is true for our grief as well. We don't find it easy to let it rise, let it flow the way it naturally wants to. We can see it come up in our physicality. We can feel it in our bodies, that grief. Feel it in our jaws. Feel it in our eyes. And often it ties to our sense of fear around death. It can. Not for all of us, but it can. Yet we would do well to listen to Christ's example, letting that come, letting it come. When presented with Lazarus' death, you all remember, he didn't immediately say, well, I'm going to fix it. You don't have to cry, you don't have to be upset, I'm going to fix it. No, he responded by crying with them, grieving with them, allowing his grief to show. He knew there was eternal life. He knew he was going to raise Lazarus, probably. He knew this, and yet the grief came through him. And he let it go. He let the grief come because his fellow human beings were grieving with him. And when we think about those we've lost, whether they're vets or not, that grief can come. And for our own health, we should let it. That doesn't mean becoming captivated by it, by getting so addicted to it, returning to it all the time. Who wants to always return to something grievous in our lives, whether it's traumatic, anger-causing? In fact, that's not very helpful for us. And yet that's often what we do. We carry around all these situations, and you can see it in yourself, that trigger us from moment to moment. We like to bring them out of our back pocket and say, remember that thing. Or it's something that we think might happen, some grievous, sad thing that's not happening yet, but might happen. And here we are already beating ourselves up about it, already doing it. And yet, most likely it won't. And often the things we carry forward, we do it because we want to protect ourselves from it happening again. And yet, here we are in the midst of all these painful, icky, tough emotions. For what? For what? No, we have to let go. Relax around our emotional states. Allow them to come up. Not stuff them down. Allow them their expression and let them go. Let them go through us. Christ was wise to prepare his followers for his death. And each of us are going to die. Each of us will pass, will leave. And yet the Lord knows that our natural state is peace. We don't have to wallow in our losses. Indeed, when our mind goes to wallowing, to despair, and all the things that our minds can do when we're not in charge of them, we can take a moment and say, no, that person is lovely and loving. I know they live on. I know they live on. Or perhaps we turn to mantra. God is all, God is love. God is all things, heaven is eternal. Whatever phrase comes to us in the moment can help us break out of these cycles, because it's not just in the really tough things, it's also when we're driving. It's also when we look at our neighbor. It's also when we interact with a friend. We can get these kind of triggers, and they're not serving us. They're not serving us. So in the vein of Christ, let's take a moment to allow our own yoke to be light, allow Christ's burden to come upon us, which is lightness, which is openness. Noting that it's us who keeps bringing these feelings into this moment, these tough thoughts, these judgmental attitudes. And we may think we like them. You know, there's probably part of us that doesn't want to reflect on that judgmental, monotone voice in our heads right now. And yet, our nature is peace. Our nature is peace. And like our soldiers, we're often called to live for our loves, to protect those we love, to help them, to support them in ways we can. Our vets, those who were martyred, have given their lives, often for us, for our families. And so when grief comes, we can remember their loving sacrifice, their continued journey. And whether they're soldiers or not, we can remember the beauty that that person still conveys, although in heaven, we can allow our minds to relax around whatever's coming up in every moment, because our fears are numberless, our judgments are too. And yet, often they're trying to express emotions that we haven't accepted in ourselves. We haven't allowed their course. And so allow that opportunity, that annoyance that's coming up, to let your body and your heart and your mind express what it needs to express, which may not be really about that moment at all. But relax around it, let it go, find your peace. May we each find our peace. And through this peace, we naturally know life continues. We can find our celebration of those who have come and gone.